Welcome inside a live edition of Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly podcast about the latest in the Ultimate World. Joining me is Keith Rayner. I'm Charlie Eisenhood, and it's our Club Nationals recap episode. Happy Halloween, everybody. Keith, you look like you're dressed up as an Ultimate player wearing a Sun hoodie.
I'm dressed up as a podcast host, a Frisbee podcast host, I guess. I got to figure out what I'm gonna do for Miles' trick or treating, because I currently don't have a great plan. And Jules was like, "We'll just make something up on the fly," but it's feeling kind of hard right now.
I hear you. Lewis is a lion today, and my mother actually suggested that we be like on the safari, and that's what I went for. So I'm rocking the safari outfit today, which was a very light lift. I'm going to be honest. All I had to do was buy a safari shirt, and I already had the hat, so we're good to go. So I hope everybody has a great Halloween. What a Club Nationals, Keith. I mean, we got a lot to get into today. If you missed it, you got to get yourself an Ultiworld subscription, because we already did essentially a full podcast, Rapid Reacts, back on Monday night, breaking down all three divisions. We're going to get into it more today. We also have an interview coming up in a little bit with Dylan Freechild from Portland Rhino Slam, who just won the title in incredibly dominant fashion over Pony. Keith, I know we're going to get into the men's recap a little bit more later, and we'll talk about it with Dylan, but 15-6 over Pony, a team that had looked so dominant throughout the tournament. I mean, have we ever seen a finals performance this convincing since you've been going to Club Nationals?
I don't think so. I mean, maybe Pony over Revolver, but I mean, we've seen mismatches. You know, we've seen teams go in there and one team just be significantly superior to the other. That's not totally unheard of. I don't know if I've ever seen a team feel like they're playing closer to the best that they possibly could than the way Rhino was playing. I mean, you want to talk about hitting your ceiling at the right time. They were immaculate. They were immaculate out there. I mean, they were so close to pitching a perfect game. People were talking about the Discord. Somebody was asking me like, what's the odds that they're gonna go without turnover here? I was like, I'm not saying anything. I don't want to be the one who jinxes it. So it was a remarkable showing from them in all facets.
2 turnovers, both from the O-line. D-line goes 8 for 8 on break chances. That's just absolutely wild. And that's against a Pony O-line that like buffed its defense a little bit with some of the players they brought over onto the O-line for Nationals. What an incredible performance. So we will dig into it more as we go. Right now, it's time for our trivia question of the week.
All right, this week's trivia question of the week, of course, it's got to be about Nationals. So just this past Saturday, Scandal knocked out Brute Squad in the semifinal round. It's the first time in quite a while that somebody other than San Francisco Fury ended Brute Squad's season. Who was the last team to take down Brute Squad at Nationals in an elimination game, and when was it? That's your trivia question.
Oh, man. I mean, there haven't been that many teams that could have even been a part of that mix for quite some time besides Molly Brown and Scandal. But I'm not remembering a time that either of those teams beat Brute in the bracket. I'm going to guess that it was Scandal in 2014. I haven't looked at that bracket or anything in a long time, but that's my guess. Brute's either won or lost to Fury otherwise.
Charlie's got his guess in, and maybe for the first time ever, Charlie just directly on target, perfect hit. Looking like Rhino in the trivia. Binged it. 2014 Scandal on the way to their second championship. Ever since then, Brute Squad has either lost to Fury or won the tournament. So
that is wild.
It's pretty impressive stuff along the way. But shout out to that 2014 Scandal group. They were pretty awesome to watch too. But yeah, it's been a while since somebody else has been the ones to pack up Boston Brute Squad.
Damn, what a great rivalry. It's one we'll see again, I am sure. Um, let me just mention real quick. Please like and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber to the YouTube. Join us. We're over 100,000 subscribers now on YouTube. It's been an incredible run, thanks to particularly a couple of YouTube shorts that have like 30 million plus views now. Go hunt them down if you haven't already watched them. It's time to welcome in now two-time national champion Dylan Freechild, who just won another one with his former and now team again in Portland Rhino Slam. Dylan, congratulations on the win. I know I don't even need to ask you. I know you're basking in the glow of all of this because we have seen you on social media. But how you feeling?
Yeah, feeling pretty good. Excuse me. Yeah, no, it's been pretty incredible, and it does wear off fast. So I'm doing my best to hang out with everybody and do the little media tour. I hung out with the pod practice guys last night, so just trying to hold on to and savor the last little moments because it does go fast.
Now, have you been giving it to the pod practice guys the way that we've been getting? I mean, I I think you haven't even got me for the worst thing that I said yet. I feel like about Rhino, which was that Truck was a bad matchup for them. Just add it to the list of many wrong things. I feel like I have to own up to. But were you giving the pod practice guys the business too? They did not fare so well in their picks either.
No, I mean, like I said before we came online, like everyone who talks has to be right and wrong all the time, and I just get to be right whenever I am right and can hide whenever I'm wrong. So, no, we did a little bit more of like analysis stuff, and it was fun to hang out with them. I did give them a little grief about saying we had an easy road at U.S. Open, even though they lost to a few of the teams that we beat on said road. So, yeah, it was fun to hang out with them. They were good sports.
Well, I want to look at your run through nationals, because I don't think that the sort of the setup going into the finals made it look like you were about to just absolutely blow the doors off of this incredibly talented pony team. You have very close games to start. 1 point wins over Furious to kick off the tournament, and then Chain Lightning. And then, it felt like kind of the margin started getting bigger. Easy win over Bravo, 2-goal win over Truck, a great game. And then, you crush Machine, and then you even further crush Pony. Did you have the feeling that you guys were getting better every game? Was it one of those kinds of things, or was it more matchup specific that you felt good in particular against particular teams, and maybe other teams gave you more trouble?
No, I think it was one of those things where, the team that improves the most from Thursday to Sunday wins, and that's always kind of like obvious, right? The best team wins, but I do think whoever improves the most also gives themselves a really good chance, and that's kind of been the case. I feel like over the last few years, I think we're kind of out of the era of just like a team dominating all regular season and then dominating nationals. Truck kind of was that, but then Bravo won, and then they also had a rocky path last year, but they've been unequivocally the best team in the regular season for those 2 seasons. But yeah, it feels like the team that catches fire, at least in the men's division, is now kind of the team that has the best shot at winning on Sunday. And yeah, we just felt pretty comfortable and confident with what we had built, but recognized that like Henry had been out of town a lot, Raider had been out of town a lot. We were still tinkering with the pieces, and yeah, we just want to make sure that we, kept our nose down and made sure that we believed in the fact that like the growth over the tournament was going to be a huge payout compared to other teams that maybe had their full rosters all year, or maybe already had like a set identity. That we were going to make sure that we just committed to trusting each other and growth, and that we were going to become a better team by tournament's end.
Well, if the measure for growth throughout the tournament is how you played in the first game and how you played in the last game, I mean, you basically played as well as a team could possibly play in the last game. And we were just marveling at watching this performance from a team that it wasn't necessarily known as being like the most consistent team ever, but came out and played like the best game maybe that we've ever seen an individual team play in the finals. What was it like actually being a part of it? Like, did you have a sense that like, wow, we are really playing our absolute best right now, or were you just in the zone? Do we is it return to the Zop?
It was a return of the Zop. No, I
So,
don't. I yeah, give me my mustache, Jesse. I don't remember feeling like we were completely overpowering them. And honestly, right, they made a few mistakes. We got a few blocks, but they made a few mistakes that made it feel like it wasn't just like we were overpowering them. And also, a lot of our conversions on D, we had just kind of found this D identity on a turn to just not give the Frisbee back. And we started just really riding that identity basically in the Bravo game, which was like, if we just never give the disc back, then then we have a really good chance of winning because, and you guys mentioned it earlier in the year, we have great defenders and create great defensive pressure, but we aren't stacked with these huge athletes. We have Daniel and Sealand, but for the most part, we have these, these smaller, smarter pressure creators, and we just needed to make sure that we capitalized on our opportunities, especially with Truck ahead of us. And so we went 3 for 4 against Truck, and we were like, we're just going to continue to not give the Frisbee back. So in that pony game, it just kind of felt like we were throwing as many passes as possible and capitalizing on a few miscues by them. But then you blink, and that kind of mentality just snowballs. And I didn't even realize we didn't have a turnover until Raider turned it over. And I kind of looked around and I was like, was that our first turnover? And then all of a sudden I was super sad. So I was glad I wasn't thinking about it the whole time, but then I was a little bummed.
who do you think's more responsible for the success of the team, the O line or the D line?
um, Again, I think this is it sounds silly or it sounds cheesy, but it's a full team. It's a full team effort, and the O line is just unbelievably talented. You look at moving Jack over and having Jack and Raider and Henry coming in. You have Rafi, Micah has stepped up in a big way. Trevor has long been like one of the most steady center handlers in the country. And then Joe and Will are just incredible players in their roles, and we have confidence in them, and that they can get the disc back, so they're able to play loose. And I think when a team plays loose, it's really scary. I think in years past, it's bitten us a little bit with the inability to get the disc back, but knowing we could get the disc back, we could really strike some fear in opponent's heart. So in that regard, like the O line, you put your best foot forward and you play without fear. Like it's going to be really scary, but it's pretty hard to deny that at least in semis and finals, the D line. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, it gets me pretty excited to look at some of these numbers that we keep around and looking at the stat sheet that Timmy kept and being like, we converted how many of our break opportunities? Like 92%. like that's insane. That's a made up number, but it's close to.
Well, you talked about having this possession oriented attack as a D line, and the offense looked pretty aggressive in their approach. Can you talk a little about the game plan and how you approached Pony and took away a team that had otherwise been one of the strongest of the tournament? You mentioned they gave you a couple of gifts, but it seemed like you had a strong game plan going in to that matchup.
Yeah, I mean, we had come up with some pretty elaborate schemes against Bravo and Chain, and wanted to make sure that it kind of covered all the bases on whether it's quick disc movement or lateral point of attack change. Obviously, that kind of applies to Truck, and then like how we were going to stop teams that like to move the ball vertically. That's more Chain. So we figured that if we came up with some pretty elaborate game plans for those two teams, we could watch footage of the next round and pick and choose little aspects of those of what we had built out for those teams. And so we had kind of just deduced that Pony was, part part Chain in the way they vertically attack, but also we thought one of their weaknesses was that we could disconnect their handler core from their cutter core. They weren't as aggressive getting downfield with their handlers as you say like a Truck or even Machine, especially if Joe is around. Like they have guys who like to get downhill from the backfield, and so yeah, our biggest game plan was to try and get Yacht and Scott to not get free outs, get them pinned on the sideline, make sure that they were staying in the backfield and not getting free loose, and then or loose downfield, and then forcing pretty much everybody else out and trying to disconnect the handlers and cutters. That's a simple dumbed down version of it, but it felt like that kind of game plan worked.
It worked so well. I mean, their cutters were so deep right from the jump of that game. They never looked in sync offensively, and they were taking the shots. I mean, if they had dialed up better hucks, they could have hit some of those shots. I mean, they had separation at times, but they were not. And obviously, your O line was hitting in a way that like you don't always see, even for a really talented line. I mean, it was just like dime after dime, and Rafi coming down with huge sky balls doesn't hurt. Um, I you know I feel like looking at it all now, it's like, oh yeah, we all should have seen Rhino coming. Like this makes so much sense. But this wasn't the team that we necessarily saw throughout the season. So how did it all come together uh in this run at nationals? And you think about like some of the ways that things could have gone differently. Like Chain was very close to winning that game against you guys, and they obviously did not win it, and you guys pulled away. But like, what made the difference for this team, and especially since you've gone through the experience of having won with a team in the past, kind of knowing what that trajectory has to look like in order to win a championship? uh, how did you draw on that to figure out how to make this team get across the finish line?
Well, yeah, it's funny you say like we all should have seen this coming, and I had a little note. I have some notes on here. It's like, yeah, I was maybe teasing Edward for the for the way that he wrote up what our season looked like, but like the tea leaves were there, right? Like Rhino had never won a sanctioned tournament, a TCT tournament. And, we won PEC West, and we had never medaled in a Triple Crown tour. We kind of crossed that off, and I'm not sure we've ever won regionals back to back. So like there were steps along the way during the season where that we were accomplishing things that Portland men's team had yet to accomplish, at least in the TCT era. And the tea leaves were there, just kind of how you wanted to read them. And so we were reading them in that regard. We were reading them as a positive light that our trajectory was moving further and further towards a championship team. And we knew that on the back end, Henry moving here finally after Worlds and Raider having 4 tickets to come out here, that we were going to, be able to start to try and execute more cleanly on the things that we had taught early season. And so having a huge trajectory from pro champs to nationals is obviously another great way to come into championship form and also surprise teams and maybe surprise commentators. And we knew that we had that opportunity on hand. So we were pretty confident with the growth, just looking at it, and then knowing that we had time to actually now execute and put this together. So when we entered nationals, you don't want to say we knew we were going to win, but I feel like a lot of us were very confident that we were going to get into striking distance, and then it was going to come down to a game or two.
One of the comments after the finals that I think has sparked the most conversation afterwards, in part because it was hilarious, but also because maybe there's some truth to it, or maybe people want to see it, is Rafi described that small ball is dead. We're done with small ball. Big ball is back. I believe he said it's sexier than ever. And obviously, y'all had the small ball approach on the D line. I mean, do you feel like there could be a strategic shift in general away from what teams have been doing for the past couple of years and back towards using a different point of attack?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I talked to Joe White a little bit about that, and they've been kind of doing the big ball stuff and sending it deep, and that's true to an extent. I think I think we just started to hit really, really, really nicely in the final, but there were still moments where Joe and Micah had to relieve pressure on the O line and make sure that the ball kept moving and that we were still moving the disc quickly. So maybe that performance now is a little revisionist on all the little ways that we had to get out of some high pressure situations throughout the tournament. But no, he's not wrong. I mean, I think that we've gotten so used to working in small spaces and trying to the way we're going to change the angle of attack and the way marks are angled and the way we're going to set up cuts, whether they're flat or whether we're slashing across the field or cutting back shoulder. And maybe sometimes don't make it too complicated. You just, the fast guy throws to the tall guy and that wins games. So it was fun to have kind of his identity on one side of the ball and my identity on the other side of the ball. And it clearly worked out a little bit better than kind of like the give and take that we were trying to figure out last year.
Fast guy go Burr. Listen, Micah Glass was the statistical leader of this team at nationals. If you kind of add it all up, double, 5 blocks, just 5 turnovers, and a high volume spot on offense. we've obviously known that Mike is really, really talented since he started playing at Oregon, and he's had a couple years on the Rhino team. But I mean, this was a new level of play from him. How good can Micah be, given the trajectory we've seen for someone who's still very young?
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to see. I think Bravo and Mama Bird kind of have a similar figure in Toby, and it's fun to see this new generation of really really young, really good players coming up. Um, Micah, I don't know what the ceiling is for Micah. He combines so much of some aspects of my game, but he has a throwing prowess that I've never had. Um, you know, I haven't been particularly great in the air recently, but I was always, quick enough to manage. But he also just has he's an underrated deep receiver, and I'm not sure with the way that he played defense. I'm not sure that I saw that effort coming on that side of the ball, and so it should be scary for the rest of the division. But I mean, yeah, the ceiling is non-existent at the moment, and I'm just excited to see where he takes it and how he forges his own path because, like I said, he has skills and intangibles that that other people who might play like him or who might resemble his game who are older than him don't necessarily have. So we just got to keep making sure he grows in the right direction, keeps his head on right, and keeps coming back to Rhino.
He's
I
got to
want to jump
represent
right back
that
in.
that ego brand too.
You
Yeah,
bet.
for sure.
I want to jump back in because you played with this Rhino team for a long time, and then you left, and it was a big story because you went up the the I-5 to Seattle and won a championship with Sockeye, and then you return, and that was like a big story when you came back. Uh, and Rhino had a decent season, but last year, but it was not didn't reach the heights that you did this year, obviously. What do you feel like you saw change, if anything, in Rhino between when you left and when you came back?
Yeah, I mean, I think the consolidated effort to find common ground and build a foundation on a common idea and purpose of why you joined the team. I think that was kind of missing a little bit across the years that I played Rhino, as far as why are you here? How are you spending your time? What is the purpose of being of competing? And it's really hard with 26 people. The answers are always going to be across the board, but you do have to kind of consolidate under an umbrella to some regard. And that was a piece of leadership that I was missing. I look back and I regret some of the ways that I led that team. I was also awfully young and just didn't know. And I felt like we had great individual vets, but we didn't have a huge group of vets, 5 to 10, like I feel like Rhino has now, that could carry some continuity and longevity across the years. And I think it was very visionary by Vin and Trevor and Rafi to be like, we want to be those guys in 6 or 7 years. And so even though they didn't have the answers when they were young, they knew they wanted to be those guys at that point, at this point in their career. And so they just started to say hey, what little piece of you can fit underneath this umbrella that we can create this foundation so that when we all blink and we're 30 and 31 and 32, not only do we have the recipe for a championship, but we also have the recipe for people like Micah and Felix and young kids to come in and perform and not have to, wonder when they're going to eat or how they're going to get better. So yeah, that's what I saw. And that's the growth that Rhino took over those years. And I'm super humbled as somebody who wasn't able to do that here in Oregon with my leadership style. And I'm also just very proud of those guys.
Well, looking backwards at kind of the legacy of the Rhino program, which obviously you're enshrined in now, and this season will be. Yeah, I think a lot of people think about Chasing Sarasota and the old documentary about Rhino's pursuit of a club title. How have you connected with that older part of Rhino, and how do you feel like this year fits into that legacy and that story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that every Rhino team and every team from Oregon has always kind of been chasing this little bit of glory, not because we feel like we have to win to necessarily prove our worth, but I do think that Oregon has always kind of done it in their own little way. And we have a specific brand and the identity that we compete with and the energy we compete with. Like every community has that. I don't think Oregon is necessarily more special than other communities, but everyone has their own thing. And um, I don't think that, or I think that many people have sometimes thought maybe we just don't quite get the recognition or respect. And I think just wanting to try and fight for a little bit of that, just so that, right, they can bring a little bit of credence to what we've been doing around here in the Northwest. And I think like chasing Sarasota was that, like, uh, just wanting the world to recognize how hard this team had been working after the '07 kind of breakup and trying to rebuild Rhino, and recognize that like all we really want is a shot to be there and be seen and represent what we're about. And so I think that kind of energy also lives on with this team. And I'm so happy that we are able to do that for so many of Rhino's past leaders and contributors, because we have gotten an awful amount of texts and messages just about how important it was for this team to finally get over the hump.
You won with Sockeye in 2019, your first title. You were the centerpiece on the offensive line. Now you're playing in a D-line role for this Rhino team in this championship. Obviously every season is different and every team is different. Do you feel more satisfied with this win because you're playing with the team that you came up playing with?
Yeah, I don't know about satisfied, but there is a certain level of, right, when I won in 2019 with Sockeye. The first thing I did was like I tried to find Trevor in the crowd. I was rocking 27 for him because it was important for me to have a piece of home with me while I competed. And the fun story about that was that Nationals was on 10/27, which is our two numbers, and then this year's Nationals was 10/27. So that was another way that Trevor and I both knew we were going to win. But I pulled out the ego tattoo, and it was important for me to flex and both literally and figuratively that like that my success was part of what the roots that I set down in Oregon, or that I was brought up in, rather. And so I wouldn't say it's more satisfying, but that was kind of my feeling then. And so I've kind of always played with that sense of pride and purpose. And but being able to do it with the team and with the jersey, and also with Trevor and Vin and Rafi, and having Matt along for the ride, I just begged him to come and hang out with some of the guys who made me the person that I am, and so that he could have a little bit of insight into the world that I grew up in and have him contribute to that. So it's definitely very special. I don't know if I'd say more satisfied, but it is definitely, like I said in the post-game interview, just you feel it on a different level. You feel it a little bit deeper. It feels a little bit more justify all the hard work and blood, sweat, and tears you've kind of poured into the Oregon soil.
You've been such a visible member of the ultimate community, and somebody who really achieved a high level of respect and acclaim, and a lot of people knew your name and knew of you and followed what you had to say on social media, and you were in this high volume offensive centric role, and it feels like you're in a very different place in your career now. You're playing on the D line. Maybe you pulled back a little bit on social media, or maybe it's just not on Twitter anymore because people are off Twitter. But do you feel like you've taken on kind of a new role or have entered a new part of your career?
Keith, have you not seen his Twitter this week?
I don't go. I try not to go on Twitter. I tried to go. I've seen the Insta post. I've seen the Insta post. But before
maybe
that,
it's instant now. It's instant.
We haven't seen that. There used to be one of those D-free rants, once every couple of weeks. Now we get one after a title. I feel like it's a different stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think, deep down inside, I think I'm all the same. I think you can call it maturity, probably not. You could call it, you can call it whatever you want. But no, I think that at some point, right, I recognize that, what I have and who I am and what I have to give, like, is good enough. And it's, I won't call it a finished product, but like, I'm proud of it and happy with it. And so that just brings a little bit more sense of calm and resolve. But like when I'm competing at practice, and the reasons that I compete, they're all the same, and all the hot takes are all still the same up here. They're all written down right here. And yeah, so a little yes, a little no. Yes, kind of the same guy. But I do think that obviously as you age and fall into your role, and just like, who I've gotten to be in this community, I think I just get to kind of settle in and be happy with being Dylan at 33.
Can we get some of the takes from your sheet of notes? You got some takes for us?
uh, there's not that many takes. I guess like some of the takes might be, um, yeah. Well, I think I got a few things from the boys. They want everyone to know that if Daniel and Seelan get cut from a Worlds game again, we're all boycotting every Worlds Trout ever again. So just quick shout out to anyone who doesn't want the wrath of me coming and making another tweet about who you cut on Worlds. The next one's going to be about Daniel and Seelan. I think my real hot take actually has to do with Raider, and he's going to hate that I bring this up, but I just think that Raider has been so often overlooked as one of the all-time greats and one of the greats of our generation. And I think like when I look back at Trevor made a little fun rubric of how all the club teams have fared over the last 15 years, and he kind of gave like 16 points for a championship, 8 points for a final, and you look at it and like Revolver's 1, and then Jimmy's 2, and then Raiders 3, and then it's Sockeye, and then it's Ring, and so I just think that it's funny that like those are two of my boys, and I just have to make sure that Raider gets a little love. He's got one first team all T World from you guys compared to like a Koch or 6, and you just realize the narrative that creates. And I just think that like Raider is an incredible athlete and teammate in this sport, and that's been often overlooked. So I'm very happy that he got the second championship, and I'm very happy that Trevor is smart and makes cool rubrics and shows that he's actually been an incredibly winning player. So that's been my hot take, is a little respect on now number 10.
Speaking of Raider and you, some next gen alums playing in this final, and Chris and Jimmy on the other side. We talked about it a little bit on the broadcast. I'm sure you guys aren't really thinking about that in the moment, but is there any sense of like, wow, like this is maybe one last time when a bunch of these next gen guys are all going to be together in a club national final and have legacies on the line? Not to say that it's impossible that it will happen again, but who knows? We might see some retirements. We might see folks just not make the final because it's really hard to do these days. Did that cross your mind at all?
Yeah, I definitely felt like it was a one of the final chapters. I won't say final chapter, but yeah, I definitely felt like kind of a little rewind, a little renaissance of all these guys, and having, we're all still at the top of our game, but it's harder to perform at the top of your game consistently as you get older and as people move into new roles. And you have Henry here and Rafi, hitting his stride or in the middle of his stride. And um, same with Pony. Like they have all these athletes that are coming up and coming in, and maybe the game's changing a little bit, but I still think like Jimmy played admirably for that team, and Chris obviously is still playing at an incredible level, and Raider coming back from the D line. And so it did feel like this kind of culmination of somehow we all got like this chance again to show our stuff and compete together and compete against each other. So it was a celebration. I talked to Jimmy and Chris before the game and after the game, and it did feel like it was a fun way to really look back and reminisce about the decade that we've had together. And I'm pretty stoked that we got to come out on top this time. I have some Pony PTSD, so to conquer that as well was a nice way. That was a nice way to finish that.
Do you think Rafi is still underrated?
I don't know. I mean, I think everyone is underrated and overrated all at the same time. I think that's the beauty of multi-world. It is like I've always been the first to admit that there were probably 4 years there where I was super overrated. There were people who could do a lot of things that I couldn't do, and then the flip side of the coin is then when you stop doing those things or you stop getting a little bit of the light, then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, wait, I'm still like almost as good as I once was. Like it's not that different. So I think that's kind of like just the game that we play, and I think Rafi is both underrated in that he's truly a one of a one like field bending talent, and he's incredible. And then I'm also sure that there are people who see the top 25 list and whatnot, and they're like, I got dudes who have been winning more games than Rafi. Like however you define greatness, by wins or by culture or by just like sheer talent, like it's always it's eye of the beholder type thing. And so I think yes, both. But I do think that Rafi is one of the great talents in the game right now.
World Games is happening next year. Are you planning to try out?
I am, yes. That is all.
All right.
I am planning to try out, and I'm hoping to make it. I think that I still have a good shot, but I again, like, I'm pretty at peace, and if they go a different direction, then they go a different direction.
Someone asked me at Nationals the over under 2.5 Rhino guys on the World Games team, and I was like, I hadn't really thought about it through that lens, and I was like, wait a second. I mean, you got
2.5.
two
Wow,
guys who are
that's a
alternates. You
fat
got
line.
Dylan, then you know, Henry's pretty good, and maybe Steven's
Henry-
Micah ready for that?
A lot of guys.
Micah, the way he played this weekend, could get a look.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of guys, and I mean, when I just think about the skill set, I just like Henry's so good in small spaces. And he can play both sides of the ball. He's really good on offense and defense as a hand. Like Henry has a really good shot. Rafi, obviously, one of the best players right now in the world. So both those guys have an incredible shot. Jack just came off maybe a career year, so was an alternate a few years ago. So Jack has a good shot, and they can't take everybody in the world. They can't take everybody on Rhino. 2.5 might be a big line, but I think it would be pretty special to see at least 2.
I'm going to take the under, but 1.5 is a more interesting line for sure. I had one more thing. I was looking at the chat real quick. Someone wants you to speak about the Claremont Brain Eaters and the possibility that they will reconference as D1 and win the national championship. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually, hey, I'm wearing my Brains for Life socks right now. So there you go. What's up? I got my Brain Eater socks on, and I believe that anything is possible.
Who's the best player in the men's division right now?
I mean, Rafi's up there. I don't know if it's clear cut as far as like who you can just say unequivocally is the best. Joe, Chris. I think like those 3 are the first 2 that come to mind. I think Johnny is there. I think those are kind of my picks for the 4 who really stand out. And I think after that, it's just kind of like whatever you see or whatever you need in a player. But those would be the 4 that I pick at the moment for just who you can really build a team around and shape, or at least are performing at a super high level.
So for the record,
do you think that machine game
Rafi
is?
Hayes, Joe Marmerstein, Chris Strub, and
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah, and Dylan Maltz.
There you go.
How different do you think that machine game is if Joe is healthy?
I mean, super different. It changes the whole complexion of their team. But you never know. Like nationals rolls around, and the favorites sometimes don't play their best, and they were already down to Pony, and obviously then you start feeling pressure, and you just don't really know. And I don't necessarily love to speculate on what that game would have been like with or without him. I'm really sad that he, he's kind of experiencing his moment right now, and he's really just coming in. He's maybe only 26. Like he has so many years left, and I have a lot of respect for Joe. I think he really loves Club Ultimate. I think he really loves the history of the game, and I was just really excited for him to have his moment. I didn't want it to be against us, and I still wanted to, kick his butt if we went up against him. But it was pretty hard to hear that injury occurred, and so that's just a bummer. And I think obviously the game would be different. And I like to think that the way that we were performing, no team was going to beat us anyways. But obviously everyone's going to have a bit of a different opinion.
I've been saying that Pony could have played their best game and they still lose that final. That's for sure. That was a crazy heater of a game. Last one, we'll take one from the chat. Emmett asks, who was the player you were most surprised by on Rhino this year, whether they were a new player or somebody coming back?
Most surprised by. I mean, I don't know. I was saying this to the pod practice guys, like they asked who the glue guys are, and I feel like Rhino's just been a bunch of glue guys. It feels like it's always been like Rafi, Leandro, and the goons, and now all those goons are like household names because of the win, and also just because of them reaching semis the last few years. And so it feels like you could say Daniel and Seelan or Owen, Vin. I mean, honestly, like really impressed with how Trevor played all year. I'm so proud of the player that he has become. that like it always just impresses me more and more just from growing up with him and playing middle school and high school with him. And but I think the two that really come to mind are, I think Felix played incredibly all year for both lines. I just didn't realize that he had that kind of consistency and that kind of aggression in him to like, he's making these downfield cuts against some of the best defenders, and we're asking him to go out and, guard Yacht and guard Malik when we have to downshift Daniel and Sealand to handlers or to some mids. And at the same time, just being a huge release valve for us whenever we needed O-line subs. And so, yeah, I think his heavy lifting was pretty incredible. And then I have to give a shout out to Chris Strub. I think Chris played the best Frisbee of his life at Nationals this year. And he might hate to hear me say this, but I didn't know he had it in him. And it was truly incredible. It was a game-changing thing for our D-line. And he was beautiful. So I don't want to say surprised, but I was very excited for him and for what he was able to bring to the team.
All right. One actual last question. Chris Mazer in the chat asks, you've played with so many great players over the years. Who do you want to play with that you haven't played with yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be fun to play with Joe. And yeah, I guess I don't know. I think I don't know if there's anyone else that I necessarily am like itching to play with. I did tell the pod practice guys like I was bummed to have not tried out for this last cycle of Worlds because right, like there's a little changing of the guard happening right now, and I really want to have an opportunity to play with the new guard and to connect with this next generation so that when I'm gone, I can have guys that I can be an old head to and talk about and congratulate them when they win a championship in their twilight. And so I was a little bummed about that. So really, any of the guys who were on this most recent iteration of Worlds like would be really fun to play with and just get to know what they're about as the game gets passed off to them. So yeah, that'll be my answer. Kind of a lame answer, but I would like to play a little Frisbee with Joe.
Awesome. Well, Dylan, congratulations once again on another title, and to the entire Portland community. I actually don't have the stat in front of me. Maybe Keith does, or maybe you do, Dylan. When's the last time a Portland team won nationals?
Well, I'm glad you asked because I wanted to hit this really quickly, but I don't know. Well, do we have time for a small story?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. Well, no, I was just going to tell the story that I was at World Games in 2022, and Miranda was doing Frisbee trivia, and we were playing Frisbee trivia, and she asked, which one of these cities has never won a club championship in men's, women's, or mixed? And there was a big, long list. There's a bunch of the mixed cities who have randomly won, some of the early years that randomly won in the open division. And I knew that Portland was the answer, and it cut me really, really deep down into my soul. So I answered that question so our team could earn points, but it was hard for me to be the one to answer, and everyone in the room laughed. And I was like, all right, I think I got to go back to Portland. And never in my wildest dreams did I think that we were going to win, but I knew that I wanted to come back and try and at least start adding to a winning culture and see if maybe we could get over the hump by way of me coaching Ego, or by way of me helping out with youth, or by way of just like supporting Vin and everything he's done. And so I never in my wildest dreams did I realize it would just be 2 years later. But I think, and someone can correct me, that it is Portland's first, at least elite club. I'm not counting Masters, although I think I combed through it all and didn't see any Masters or Grandmasters. So I think this is Portland's first championship. Schwa had a few finals appearances, and I think that's part of the reason that this has just been so big and important is just like, the team was made up of like 19 or 20 Eugene youth, train wreck YCC kids from Portland, people who attended Oregon. Like, this team is so homegrown. And then, then you add like Henry and Jack and Raider, but but this team is so homegrown, and like, right, we were player led almost the whole year. Timmy joined us halfway through, but just like the wealth of knowledge that we have from Vin and Trevor and Daniel. I know Daniel's came over here from High Five, but yeah, it's just felt like when you think about how much we've coached high school and how much we've coached OSU and Frainer coaching Lewis and Clark and the D3 kids who stick around, that this just felt like a really homegrown old school win. And I think it was the first one for Portland. So we're very proud of that. And yeah, we're stoked to see if we can build on it.
Timmy's finals fit was tremendous. Tremendous.
Yeah, I mean, adding Timmy was huge. It's good to have somebody who's at the very tippity top, who can make those calls in game, and also like, yeah, even though most of the players came up with the strategy or kind of pulled the strings on adjustments, having somebody else deliver it or having somebody check you, like, and he just brings such a cultural add that I don't know if we do it without Timmy. So, right, and he's also another homegrown boy. So, yeah, it was. He is a character, and I don't know how much longer he's going to continue to be a character in this community. But by golly, he can keep doing it with us.
All right. Dylan Freechild with us here on Deep Look. Congrats again, Dylan. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So Rhino Slam closing it out, 15-6 win over Pony. And I mean, Keith, an incredible run. I'll ask you the same question I asked Dylan. Who do you think deserves more credit? The offensive line or the defensive line this weekend?
That's a good question. I'd probably say the defensive line. I mean, I think they were just so clean. They came up with good defensive game plan. It helps to have a little that the D line gets a little help from the O line. You know, like there aren't a lot of times when D line guys are crossed over to play with the offense, but it helps to add Henry and Rafi occasionally to your D line. So I think I'd give the credit to the D line, but you don't take away my O line credentials for that, please. I need to keep those.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's true that it was balanced. I just counted it up, though. They had 33 blocks from their defense. Well, I shouldn't say from their defense. They had 33 blocks on the weekend recorded in the USAU stats. That is a lot. That is a lot. Monster weekends from Daniel Lee, who had 6 blocks, 4 goals, 4 assists. David Sealand, 8 goals, 5 assists, 4 blocks. Each of those guys just had 1 turnover on the weekend. That is really nice when guys are playing that clean. 16 assists for Jack Hatchett. I mentioned Micah Glass's double-double. Rafi had 13 goals, 6 assists, and, you know, no cheapies either. I mean, he was just dunking on people. It was awesome to watch. Super fun team. Super fun to watch. Like, I was saying after the broadcast, I haven't watched a 15-6 game that compelling in a long time. Maybe a combination of the story, how clean the game was overall, obviously specifically on Rhino's side, and you know, just some of the individual playmaking was awesome. What a great final. For a blowout.
It may have not been the most dramatic, but it was still pretty fun to watch.
Well, yeah, what do you think of Pony's performance, Keith? They had kind of struggled to put the pieces together, and it does feel like they did that. Do you feel positively about the way that they played, even though they got blown out in the final?
Yeah, obviously it's going to leave a sour taste in your mouth. But I feel like lower than average on Pony coming into this tournament. I thought that some of the flaws from the regular season might carry over into the postseason. Particularly, I was worried about the World's guys reintegrating and being healthy and being fresh and being focused. And I actually thought that group looked really strong. Cam Warner and Antoine Davis and Chris Kocher, maybe most of all. I mean, he was on an absolute tear. So I thought that those guys who may have seemed like question marks to me coming in acquitted themselves really nicely and were a big part of why, up until maybe the final, Pony looked like the best team in the men's division. You know,
they were the favorite.
Let's not forget that what happened to them in the final, they did to Ring of Fire in quarters, you know, or in semis rather. So like they are in quarters. It was quarters.
It was quarters.
They
beat Revolver close and
had that capability too. Yeah, they beat. Yeah, I was looking at the picks where Ring was in semis, so that was my incorrect picks, not the actual events. They thumped Ring in quarters in similar fashion. Like there was good reason to feel really good about their weekend. I've already heard Isaac Saul talk about how proud he was of the team to bring it together, and maybe it feels like it lets them off the hook a little bit to be like, well, we got to the final, we played a team who was playing unbeatably, so what are you gonna do? I bet that they don't exactly feel like that, but it does give you a little bit of permission to be like, well, there wasn't much else we could do in the final.
Yeah, I mean, they looked fantastic the rest of the weekend. I mean, they had bigger margins of victory throughout compared to Rhino. Um, they blistered Machine to kick off the weekend, and that kind of set the tone. Their D line was playing amazing, and frankly, I thought their D line. You can't say that they had a great final because it took them, I think, too long to adjust. And but on the other hand, they were doing the thing that normally works. They were forcing out, they were forcing guys to put up hucks, and they were right there. It's just that the hucks were inch perfect. And so Jabron lays out and he's missing the disc by 2 inches and it's landing clap catch in a receiver's hands. Credit to Rhino's throwers for doing that. I didn't love how many backhand hucks I saw going up. I think that we should have seen adjustments right away on that front. I feel like at least 4 or 5 of those hucks, especially early in that game, were pretty much unencumbered backhand side hucks. Once they started to junk the lanes a little more, it felt like they got some purchase and, eventually they forced a couple turnovers late. But overall, I thought their D-line played amazing. I think ultimately they just didn't have enough time to get their offense right. The whole season, it was never quite right. And I'm not sure that, if they could go back and start over, that they would try to build around Jimmy. I have to be honest. Jimmy finished the weekend with 6 assists and 10 turnovers. And obviously he's asked to do a lot. And he's a really, really talented thrower. But I think that you saw some limitations from him throughout the season, Keith. And I think we saw it pop up again in the final. And we even saw him get benched a couple points. And I think you can understand why, maybe he didn't get taken for a world spot this cycle. And he's going to go down as one of the greatest players to ever play, but I'm not sure he quite had it in 2024.
No, I mean, he had 2 turns and no other stats in the final, and they were not good turns. Definitely a rough close for Jimmy, but Chris looked awesome. He and Sam Little were really the engines of the Pony offense, and I think both are going to be in position to potentially get all club recognition. So I think that the O line definitely felt like the weaker side of the Pony attack.
Overall, though, like Pony going from a team that looked at times like they weren't going to get out of quarters, was by far the second best team there. Like, there's no question that they were really, really good when it mattered the most at nationals. And they just happened to come up against a team that had the right game plan and the right strategy offensively to punish Pony for what they were trying to do on defense that was working against everybody else. And it happens. It happens. Sometimes teams hit their shots, and when they're hitting their shots, they can be very hard to beat. Especially a team with the cutters as talented as what Rhino has to offer. What else stands out to you from the men's division, Keith? And I know we went through this in a little bit more detail in our rapid reacts that we recorded on Monday for subscribers. So we don't have to go through all of those topics because we've already discussed them there. But there was no truck in the final. Obviously, Machine feeling a little bit disappointing, but tempered by the fact that Joe White had the non-contact knee injury.
It was so disappointing. It's such an unfortunate series of circumstances. Like the team deserves a ton of credit for still putting together as strong of a tournament as they did, despite that fact. I mean, it's hard to think of an individual on a team that had a more central role than Joe White on Machine. So very few teams, I think, could have been put in any tougher spot to adapt to. Fortunately, they had players really ready to step up. I was incredibly impressed with Nate Goff. Thought he played really fantastic ultimate. Don Emery obviously is super productive, but I think his role is maybe a little bit easier from a technical standpoint, for partly by design, because he's not as familiar with the systems that the team runs. So I thought Goff and Bansfield really had to step up into bigger roles. They brought over some other O-line guys who played pretty well. So a lot of credit to Machine. There's going to be a ton of hype about Rhino and Revolver going into next year, given how young they are, given how good some of their young players played. And Sockeye too. So Sockeye, I think, another team that looked pretty good and featured their young players very prominently. I think those 3 teams are going to have a lot of hype, and it'll be very interesting to see how we have to lay out the the very top of the power rankings next year.
A lot of pod practice hate for my revolver pick to semis. A lot of hate. Not right. By the way, I will not be becoming an observer, at least this year, Keith. And pod practice taking a large L in the picks. Is that right?
That is correct. I by my count, really, the subscribers, myself and Charlie, basically all did about the same, and pod practice fared very poorly. Not a strong effort for them, particularly in the mixed division, where they got 5 quarterfinalists and no other correct picks, no semis, no finals, no champion. So the pod practice learned.
And they only picked one of the semifinalists in the men's division, Keith.
Eep. That's there's so much to talk about. We're obviously going to need another episode because we still got to talk about Bravo, Truck, Dig.
Bravo.
What happened with Dig?
Looking lost out there.
There's
Keith.
Probably worth talking about Sockeye. Like there's a lot to talk about, and it's clear we're going to need a part 2 for our recap.
Oh, no doubt. I would like to note that I had perfect women's division picks, quarter semis, finals winner. I was the only one to achieve a perfect bracket in any division. Is that accurate?
That's true. Oh, that's definitely accurate.
Did anyone pick? Oh, you picked hybrid. Credit to you. You were the only person to pick a winner other than outside of the women's division. Nobody picked Rhino, and you had hybrid. So shout out to you. We will discuss that division, both of those divisions, more after we take a quick break. So mixed women's coverage coming your way as we break down club nationals right here on a live edition of Deep Look.
Hey, this is Antoine Davis. You take the field with basically 2 things, yourself and your cleats. That's why you need the best on your feet.
For me, I want a grip to handle my change of direction and stick with my person on defense. I want my cleat to be light to help me play long points and accelerate to get to my top speed. That's why I love my Toe K cleats. They're specifically designed for ultimate, with a cleat pattern for the game's sharp cuts and a durable, breathable, supportive build to keep your feet and ankles protected and comfortable for longer. That's why I've been using them for 3 years. They're my best ally on the field. You put your best self on the field, so make sure you're bringing the best with you at tokay-ultimate.com. That's TOKAY-ultimate.com. Tokay, sky the limits.
Heads up, Breakmark now has sublimated 5-panel hat. You can get the hat and their famous reversible free with the purchase of one of their 3-piece team bundles, starting at just $85. Get all the details at breakmark.com.
All right, we are back on Deep Look, live on YouTube every Tuesday at noon, except this week when we're Thursday at 2:30 because we were traveling and we both took red eyes and it was too much crazy.
Or last week, Nationals throw your schedule off a little bit.
But we'll be back on our normal schedule next week. We're going to talk a little bit about the women's division right now. Fury wins their 13th national championship. They're the most dominant team ever in Club Ultimate. And Keith, it is just, they are relentless. They looked so great this weekend. You look at the overall team performance, 15-12 win in the final against Scandal, 15-12 over Molly, 15-11 over Sixers, 15-10 over Flipside, blowouts over Traffic and Nemesis. I mean, there was just no question. There was never a question. And as good as Scandal looked, they were just simply not deep enough to hang in there over the course of a full game against this Fury side. And you got great performances from the young players. You got great performances from the veterans like Carolyn Finney, who goes crazy in the finals. What a
Unbelievable.
weekend for this Fury team, Keith.
I mean, look, they even closed that game out without the services of Anna Thompson. You know, that's how deep and how good Fury was. And you know, they just couldn't deal with a drought. It had been a drought really in San Francisco, a drought of titles. They had to go a whole 2 years without taking home a ring, and they just couldn't stand it anymore. You know, they're like, do people even remember who Fury is, what we're about? I mean, they were the best team. I don't think there was any doubt about it by the close of the weekend. And I said this in our subscriber piece that we did in the airport on Monday, but I thought that this was a year in which they could finally start to become a little more shallow. They were bringing in these young players who didn't have as much elite club seasoning as their typical rookies have. They weren't bringing in a bunch of stars like they typically do. You know, usually they're bringing in established club players from other teams, and they're losing really key players, Amel Wada Kareem, Opie Payne, among others. And you felt like maybe we could finally see this team regress into being a normal team, and they didn't. Instead, they took that crop of rookies, turned them into superstars overnight. It felt like, and it was incredible to me that they were playing huge points and centering the disc to Sarah Von Depp or whatever. Sarah Von Depp's lived up to it, but not a lot of teams are doing that with their rookies playing their first year of truly high level elite club. She's playing her first club semis and finals, and she and Olivia Goss and McKinley McQuaid, they're stuck right in there with everybody else, asked to execute and delivered on that. It was a true showing of what the magic of Fury is.
Yeah. I think there were times in the past where it was like, well, there's no stars. Fury has no stars. It's hard to pick players out because they're all contributing, and they still have that aspect to them. But I do think that there were players who were clearly a step above and were the best players for the season, right? So Finney, who had a great final and overall just continues to play at such a high level. Anna Thompson was spectacular, especially in the bracket at Nationals. And how about Kirsten Johnson, who was taking the toughest defensive assignments and making those players work to get their points while contributing on offense and not turning the disc over very much. I mean, what more can you ask for from a defensive player? I thought that she was extremely impressive, and a big part of the reason that they were able to pull away from top-heavy superstar teams in Molly and Scandal in the bracket.
She's had a lot of growth over the past couple of years, and to see her match up with Claire Trope is not a thing I ever would have thought was on the table for this Fury team that has a lot of good defenders. But they felt like KJ gave them the best matchup, and obviously it worked out in their favor. Other player, obviously Dina Elmelik, very very strong. I thought she was one of their best players. I thought Bree Howard was also continuing to somehow execute at a high level, and Juliana Werfely, who I think she and Carolyn Finney were just like a duo that Scandal could not find a way to stop, especially in the red zone. I mean, it turns out that this triangle style dominator attack is like catnip for Finney. This is Finney's game. The meta has come to Carolyn Finney, and you put her next to Juliana Werfely, who basically never turns it over. And they both have a wide range of breakthrows and are really tough players. And they were just eating up the Scandal defense anytime they got near the end zone.
Shayla Harris holding it down at the back of the defense, getting deep blocks. Just really impressive. And I mean, look, the teams that they went up against late in the bracket, really, really good. Arguably have better top threes. I think you could at least make a case for, the Cardenas twins and Claire, or Trope and Groom. But the difference was that down the down the board, Fury just had better matchups across the field as you get down to those 5, 6, 7 spots on the line. And they were getting it from players who were not necessarily household names coming into the season, which I think is a great point that you make, Keith. And when Thompson goes out with an injury, Fury hardly blinked. And there was a lot of reliance on Claire Trope, for instance, who clearly the player of the year in 2024. You know, there was a lot of weight on Claire's shoulders in that final. And the points started to pile up, having a crossover on the D points. And that seemed like one of the problems for Scandal is that their offense did fine, I thought, but their D-line, even though they had more break opportunities than Furies, had a really hard time putting the disc into the end zone against a very balanced set of Fury lineups that tends to have a lot of great defenders on the field, even if it's an offensive point. And they could not score those breaks, and they never were able to sort of like refine purchase in the game.
Some of this to me, I think speaks to the genius of Maddie Sang and the Fury leadership, Nancy Sun included, is that they're so good at leveraging their depth. I mean, the system I don't feel like is super complicated that they are operating with on offense. They're using a lot of horizontal movement. They're taking stall count, or they're taking resets at the right time, staying patient, but everybody is able to execute it. And then on top of that, basically everybody they put out on offense is a very capable two-way player. So even if they're not at their absolute top level of execution, they're always going to be tough to score on anyway. So they really put in like a total effort. And I don't feel like you saw some sort of, you think about how Rhino was playing and the superpowers that they won on the show in the final. And Fury's superpower is just kind of that like relentless inevitability rather than like, we're just going to jump ball you to death. Like we're going to small ball you to death. None of those things is how they operate. It's just like everybody's going to go out. They're going to do their job. We're going to make every point tough. And we'll wear you down that way because we can go deeper than you can. And that just was true. They were right to make that bet.
I want to comment on the women's division overall. I don't think we've ever had as compelling a path to a championship as we have this year. Now, you might think it sounds a little chalky when, for instance, as I mentioned, I picked all 8 quarters, 4 semis, 2 finalists, and the winner. Like that suggests that it's fairly easy to predict who's going to win. And there is still some truth to that relative to the other divisions. But look back at how this actually played out. If you look at pool play alone, Schwa beats Bent by 1 goal. Scandal beats Bent by 1 goal. Schwa and Parcha play a 2-goal game. Brute, 15-14 over Sixers. Molly Brown, 14-13 over Sixers. Brute over Molly, 12-11. This is all just pool play. You could say the same thing about Pool D, where you've got, 2-goal win for Phoenix over Riot, Iris over Grit by a goal, Phoenix over Grit by a goal. And then we get to pre-quarters, Keith. Sixers over Schwa by 2 goals. Molly over Bent by 2 goals. That was a very competitive game. Riot over Traffic by 3 goals. Flipside over Iris by 1 goal. This is all, by the way, in track meet conditions. Perfect sunshine, very little wind. Molly Phoenix in quarters, 14-13. That was, I guess, technically really the only super close quarter. But then, the semis and the final were competitive games. They could have gone either way. They were not universe games, but they were close. It feels like not only is the top end tightening up and there's more teams that could potentially win a title, but that middle group is also playing really well. And like we saw the Bent and the Flipsides and the Sixers of the world right there. Like Bent has a couple games go differently and they're in semis, Keith. I don't think there's any question about it. They lost 3 games by a total of like 4 goals.
And Sixers losing to a pair of semifinalists in pool play by a single goal. And then also proving to be competitive in their bracket play too. Like, they also had to win a tight game over Schwa. Like, I agree. I think if you just look at who moved on, then you might conclude that this is a chalky tournament. And if you were there, it didn't feel that way. And if you start to dig into the scores, it didn't feel that way. And if you pay attention to some of the games, even that quarter between Flipside and Scandal, huge blowout, right? Well, if you watch the first half, and did get to the second half, you might not see that. It took Scandal a while to wear down that flip side team and pull away in that game. I think you'd find more games like that if you dig in. So it's happening a little more slowly than maybe people would want. People are ready for some big upsets, and they've been so few and far between. But the margins are getting slimmer and slimmer, and it's getting tougher and tougher to make that full march all the way to the title.
More discussion from our subscriber bonus segment on Monday. Check it out with an Ulti World subscription. Get bonus episodes for every Deep Look week. Mixed division. How about this hybrid team? Here's their scores from the tournament. 15-7, 15-9, 15-12, 15-10, 15-9, 15-9. That's in order. To win your bracket games by 5 or more goals in all 3 games is crazy. They were unbelievable, Keith. And, Nathan Champeau absolutely locking everybody up. No chance. 12 blocks on the weekend. 12. He gets a double-double with blocks and assists. Aaron Bartlett, double-double in goals and assists. He was tremendous. Dalton Smith playing awesome on the D-line. 9 blocks for him and 15 assists on just 8 turnovers. Theo Shapinski, Sarah Nitz coming up huge with some goal scoring, especially later in the bracket. We knew they could be good, and they basically really realized the potential in full and blasted everybody they played. I think BFG would have had no chance against them if they had faced off in the bracket.
And don't forget that they had what their most impressive performances, winning semis and finals 15-9. They did most of that without national team player Rachel Mast, who got hurt really early in the semifinals. Good luck to her on the road to recovery. But, just showing off the depth a little bit. And I think that this is a team that we've known as athletic. We know can just chuck it around and ask some of their big athletes. And they're really good deep throwers, maybe even as much as their athletes. They have some great huckers. That could have been the ticket. I think they showed off a little bit of discipline. Sure, Dalton Smith and Theo Shapinski were still putting up deep shots, and Sarah Nitz and Aaron Bartlett were still coming down with them. Mark Witten was doing a little bit of both. But the other thing, they got a lot of sharp execution in the midfield. Some of that's from Bartlett, some of that's from Tracy Lowe, who I think didn't fill up the stat sheet, was a key quarterback for them. McKenna Mattimore was another player who kind of greased the wheels for the offense for them. So I was pretty impressed with their level of execution on top of just the athleticism and the talent. And to see a team that is led by a defensive player is really compelling. Skunk is a very interesting personality. He's kind of a wild man in some ways, but he's also kind of a big sweetheart. But then he plays like this kind of goon. But when you hear him talk on the sidelines, he is incredibly positive. It's a very interesting figure. But you just don't see defense first players like this go out and dominate. It's weird to have that feel like that's at the precipice of a division right now.
Sprocket, Keith, makes this run to the finals. Nobody saw them coming, really.
Wow.
And how could you? I think it would have been hard to foresee that a team that lost to Slow by 5 goals at regionals and came up 4 goals short of Dragon at ESC and lost a bunch of games at PEC East. They were clearly a good team. They were a nationals team, but who saw them coming all the way to a finals appearance? They also lost the opening game of their tournament, but then they were hitting. I mean, beating Shame 15-11 was really the signal, right? They win the pool with that win. A very good Shame team. They take out a sort of rising mixtape team with a lot of youth. But then I think, I was saying before their semi against BFG that they were going to get crushed. And instead it was them doing the crushing. They comfortably won that game 15-12. And, to be perfectly honest, I think you just have to acknowledge that Tanner Johnson-Go was just playing out of his mind. I mean, he goes for 3 goals and 4 assists against BFG. And, he was a driving force for a lot of the weekend. But what a game he had against Seattle BFG.
Yeah, there's even Sprocket, I think, would cop to the fact like we didn't expect all this. If there are people who had to change their fights at the end, I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, they blew a four goal run. They were up 13-10 in that opening game to Shine that they lost 14-13. Four straight to lose that game. When they beat Shame at the end of pool play, I think they still were eligible to not make the bracket.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that round,
almost anything was
two,
possible in that round.
Yeah, at that point, I think like Shame was locked to make the bracket, but where they would finish was unclear. And like Shine couldn't win the pool, or Slow couldn't win the pool. One of the bottom two teams couldn't win the pool, but every other potential outcome was still on the table in the last round of Pool D, and both of the results broke in a way that put Sprocket in first. So I mean, they earned that. Don't get me wrong. You beat Shame by 4. That doesn't happen on accident, especially in a game that matters. But just to underscore how close their weekend was to being very, very different from what we ended up getting. And I agree with you. Tanner Johnson-Go is obviously the big name star of this team and the driving force of their offense, but they didn't get to the final just because he played really well. They really brought it on defense, especially in the semifinal. I mean, there are a bunch of players who I'm not super familiar with. Some of them I am, but I didn't know they had it like this. But they came out and they were just absolutely locked down on defense. Yeet Demelrop, Wilhelmina Graf. They were playing great defense. Taylor Hansen came up with some huge plays in the final. Lift players, already a player who we know as brings it defensively. Ivan Tran, and then offensively, Zach Singer, Leo Blueston were players that I think had really big weekends that stepped up in a big way for this team. They didn't play a perfect game by any means through the weekend. Like there were some clear weak points in their performance. But all credit to them for the second biggest surprise of nationals to me is them making finals. After the Rhino thing, like you could argue that it's a bigger shock because I still am not exactly sure how they did it. Besides playing some really great defense down the stretch.
Unfortunately, they ran into Nathan Clampeau in the finals. Now,
I thought we
chat,
talked about this. It's Nathan National Champo is what it is.
Hybrids in the chat. Mark Witten, I'm assuming, is asking Skunk for Pody. Where do you land on that? Skunk, of course, being Champo, for those who are unaware of the nickname.
Yes. Nathan Skunk Champo. I mean, he certainly got a case. You want to follow the best player on the best team kind of argument? He's certainly in there. Although maybe you want to point at Aaron Bartlett as well from Hybrid. I don't know exactly. We'll be sending out the ballots for our voters just after this. So I'm gonna have to sit down and make my decision over the next couple of days to decide who I'm gonna vote for. But I think people are gonna be looking at Tanner Johnson-Go. They're gonna be looking at Connor Belfield again. Jay McLaughlin had another great weekend. So you saw great tournaments from players who've already established themselves. Leaf was one of the leaders in assists at the tournament. So was Travis Dunn. He led the division in assists. So a lot of the all-club players from last year turned in tremendous performances again. So it's going to be a tough vote, but I think if you don't have Nathan Champo in the players that you're considering, then you're doing it wrong.
Oh yeah, for sure. 3 blocks in the final. They completely destroyed the Sprocket game plan on offense, and that game was never competitive. Credit to the coaching staff, but also just individually, Champo was awesome. 1 seed BFG, they had such a great season. We have to say it. It's a disappointment for them to come up short to a Sprocket team that you would have assumed that they would be probably 3.5 point favorites against coming into that game, and they lose by 3.
There's no way around that. I missed the first half of that game, but it showed up, and yeah, I was like, what am I seeing? And BFG could never find that pull away. They didn't have anybody. I feel like had like a really fantastic final. Sam Rodenberg and Cheryl Sue probably playing the best of anybody on the team, but they could not find an answer for Tanner Johnson-Go, which you would expect a team that has two or three of the most reputable mail matching defenders in the division to be able to come up with an answer, and they just couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, Lucas Ambrose had a great weekend overall. 10 goals, 11 blocks, 4 assists, just 2 turnovers. And he's going to be in that conversation too for player of the year, by the way. But just a disappointing showing from their offense. There's no question. I think they struggled to kind of like maintain connectivity downfield with their handler set. A few too many turnovers from their primary handlers. And, to that point, they had played quite well. You almost wonder if like they overlooked a Sprocket team that they expected to comfortably beat, and they didn't show up with the requisite focus. Because, they crushed Red Flag 15-7, 15-4 over Lawless, 15-11 over Tower. I mean, day one, domination. Just came out flat in that semi, and they never found a way back into the game.
Do you think that's your team that's most disappointing in the division?
Well, I mean, I could go through and look for others. I feel like, you could talk about shame, but ultimately they lose a 1-goal quarterfinal to Dragon Thrust, who was technically seated ahead of them. A little disappointing not to repeat. Austin Disco Club kind of flamed out. They got absolutely destroyed by Exist 15-5 in pre-quarters. But what were the expectations for that team? I mean, I think you were in here on the pod in the preview show saying that they weren't going to do much, and in a way they didn't do much.
Yeah, that did not stop them from a lot of other people besides me felt like Distro Club was in a spot to do well, and I get it. I mean, they had a great regular season. Wouldn't be the first time we've seen a team that's fairly new go on to do pretty well. But they had a decent pick rate in the Beat Charlie Challenge to make semifinals, and to even do better than that. So I definitely think it was a disappointing weekend for the South Central. I mean, those are the two teams that jump out to me. If you think about Shame taking that pool, how different their weekend could have been, and instead they load against Sprocket.
Yep.
That puts them in a position to have to play that game against Dragon Thrust. Disappointing weekend for those teams. And Red Flag getting knocked out in pre-quarters. I think there was a sense that they could be a better team than that. Rally, I was high on. They didn't win a game in pool play. Exist. Maybe you knew without Jolie Krebs that they might take a step back, but they finished third in their pool. They actually ended up putting up a pretty good fight down the stretch, but ultimately you're knocked out in quarters, can't keep their semi streak up. So there were a lot. It was an open division, which makes it hard to exactly assess who fell short of expectations because there was such a wide range of outcomes possible. But I'm sure there are teams that are pretty sour with how their tournament went.
I mean, Exist was up 11-9 in that BFG game, and they let it get away from them. I mean, the ball was in their court for much of that game. Their O-line being able to go out and have the ability to hold and keep them in front, and just couldn't quite get it done. The fact is, I don't look at Exist weekend as like particularly disappointing, though. You're like losing to the number 1 overall seed and doing it that arguably your best player, not being at the tournament. What could you really expect? Like, if they win that game, they're not winning the next one. Like, this is not a team that was going to win a title. You wonder what it would have been like with Krebs out there, though. I think it could have changed everything. I think they would have been a much more formidable foe, and perhaps they get that win against BFG. Hard to say. You never really know how these things are going to go.
Christian Flores in the chat says 13-10 score of death. Where's most dangerous score in Ultimate now? Being up 13-10.
I will note, Exist would have played Sprocket. I actually don't know. Did those teams play at regionals? I'm not sure they played all season, actually. So who knows what would have happened there? But interesting to consider, and it's availability of players is a big deal, and like not having people get hurt is a big deal. There's a lot of what ifs and question marks when you have great players either missing the tournament or getting hurt early, and it's hard. It's hard to live through. If you're a team like Machine, you're just thinking about, we're so snake bit. Like, they lost multiple people, and I think they were the best team all season. And I don't know if they win the title, but it would have been a different story if everybody was healthy.
Yeah, it's part of the equation. We talk about it all the time, how hard it is to win a title, and part of that's getting lucky and staying healthy, and or being strong enough to deal with your injuries, which is really hard to ask in some situations.
All right. Well, we are going to have more to come on Club Nationals next week. We're going to have some more interviews with some champions from the other divisions. So, looking forward to doing that. And stay tuned soon for subscribers. We're going to be doing some send it backs where we watch back the national championship games with players from the teams that competed in them. This is something we did back during COVID times, and we're bringing it back this off season. So, if there's games that you're hoping to see players watch again, let us know. And we'll be back with you next Tuesday at noon, live right here on the Ulti World YouTube channel. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Before we sign it off, we've got a mailbag question of the week to get to. So, Keith, give it to us.
All right. So this week's mailbag question of the week is interesting one. Will we ever see a city sweep again at the club championships? If there is going to be a city, which city will be the next to sweep?
Well, so when was the last one? Was it Boston 2016?
Fortunately,
most recent sweep.
We have a note. Yeah, it is Boston in 2016. Ironside, Brute Squad, and Slow White. San Francisco prior. Had the prior two in 2010 and 2011.
Yeah,
wow, they
heyday of
back
Fury and
years.
Revolver and Blackbird. Like, yeah, they were just dominant forces. I find it extremely unlikely. I think it's so hard in modern Ultimate to have enough talent across all three divisions to win in all three divisions. Like, what was there even a hypothetical this year? Like, okay, so Truck and Scandal, but they didn't have a Rally was nowhere close.
I mean, Sprocket was in the final. I don't know, maybe maybe Rally is closer than you think. Maybe that means Sprocket, Brute Squad.
If you go 0-3 in pool play, you were not close to winning the championship. I'm sorry.
Sprocket, Dig,
Sprocket, Brute,
Dig? Do you count Shame?
Yeah.
Do you give Colorado? Do you give Denver Shame? Like maybe
Yeah, I would give them Shame. I mean, I think it's possible. I think it's highly improbable, and I would bet against it happening in the next 10 years. That's what I would say. I would say the odds of a sweep are something like plus, in the next decade, probably like plus 500, maybe higher than that, plus 800. I just don't think it's possible anymore.
I mean, I agree with you. I think it's pretty improbable. It's so hard to win any title, let alone to have three come together from the same city. Even the big powerhouse cities that are able to put in multiple teams to nationals, it just feels like the odds of having everything aligned so that you have all the talent to do it all in 1 year, it's just unlikely. It's not impossible.
It's unlikely.
We could see paths this year how it could have happened, but it's a tough parlay to hit, so to speak.
Quick fact for you that I hadn't thought of
way.
before. Nice. A quick fact that I saw in the chat earlier, and I wanted to just mention. We've talked a lot about how we haven't had a repeat men's champion since Revolver did it in 2010, 2011. But in the last 8 years, we've now had 8 different men's title winners. No repeats in that span. Not even back to back, but just at all. That's crazy. When will that streak end? I'm gonna say next year.
I'm gonna say
2025. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a year or two.
Who is still eligible to keep the streak alive?
Machine.
That's realistic. Machine, Chain. I think you could say Chain, right?
Yeah, I guess
Machine is
there's a world of which
surely more likely. Who else? Let's see. You really don't have many other teams. Shrimp.
I mean, Dig didn't exist,
How
right?
about
Is
Shrimp?
Dig
Double Wide.
Dig.
I guess Dig would
didn't-
count. Yeah, no, Dig. You're right. Machine, Dig, and
didn't
Chain
exist
are
in
your
that
three most
time.
likely teams. What's like the combined odds of one of those teams winning next year is probably pretty good.
Yeah, so you have 1 or 2 years. There's no 2 years seems really unlikely.
Maybe we'll get those 3 teams winning in the next 3 years. 11 straight years of no repeat winners. That'd be wild.
Shrimp coming in 12. Let's make it 12.
Well, I think Shrimp's going to get better. Northwest men's looking real good right now. Shrimp's gonna all that Bonneville Flatball Club, that's dead. The Shrimp's gonna bring it all together.
Shrimp.
We're gonna have a real Utah team, and they're gonna be pretty good. They could be quarters good,
Maybe.
right? Yeah. I
We
got
need
some
a
shrimp
title
merch.
good.
Shout out to the shrimp. Shout out to the shrimp folks. Shrimp stickers, shrimp keychain. I got a shrimp hat, which I passed on to our wonderful editor Teresa, who now has the shrimp hat and will be rocking it, I am sure.
Someone in the chat asked me about shrimp puns, but they don't know that we're not on shrimp puns anymore. We're on Juliana Werfley, aka Werf puns. It's Werf pun season out here, not shrimp pun season. So get to Werf.
It's time for us to go get to Werf, and so we're going to sign off right here for this edition of Deep Look. He's Keith Rayner. I'm Charlie Eisenhood. Thank you so much to our producer, Lindsay Sue, and for all of you being with us live here on the YouTube every week or wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a review, a thumbs up, a 5-star review. We appreciate it. Trying to get the word out to more folks about this pod and about the wonderful sport that we get to enjoy every day. Off-season is here, but there's lots to talk about. We'll see you next week, Tuesday, noon Eastern.
Shout out Andy with the trivia. Appreciate
Shout
you
out this
for-
election getting over with, Keith.
Oh,